So, for those of you who are new here, our theme for the year of 2018 has been exploring universal truth principles in the world's religions. And for January and February, we're talking about Hinduism. Today, however, we're going to talk a little bit about Hinduism, and we're also looking at a book called Thunder of Silence by Joel Goldsmith to anchor in the universal truth principles behind these religions, to recognize and see and feel that these truths in all of the world's religions. So one of the things that we've been discovering about Hinduism is how vast it is. If there's anything that we can gather, even from January, is that Hinduism really acknowledges diversity. They recognize that there are so many different types of people, and that they therefore tailor their religion to include all the different types of people. And we're not just types of people, but where we are on our path at any particular moment. So we're all at different points in our path at different stages. So last month we talked about they had 4 different types of desires. You have the desire for pleasure, you have desire for fame, success, and duty, fame, success, and wealth. You might have desires to create service, participate in the community to make the world a better place. And the 4th desire is to know God. And then with that desire to know God, there's 4 paths, 4 yoga paths. Hatha yoga, by the way, the physical, is all about preparation for meditation yoga. But they call them bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, karma yoga, and raja yoga. That's the path of devotion, the path of reflection, the path of service, and the path of meditation. So already we see there's just a lot of diversity, accepting that people, and then we're all a little bit of everything. I mean, they have definitions for each of these categories, which we talked about in January, and to recognize that we all have a little bit of all of them in us, and just in different degrees. So we recognize already how unique and diverse we are. Today I'm going to only spend a very little bit time on the next 2 aspects. We're using Houston Smith's book, The World's Religions. So this is the chapter on Hinduism. And so the next 2 sections are stages of life and stations of life. Again, we have the 4. For the stages of life, they recognize that we all are at different stages of life, that humanity tends to go through 4 basic stages. So you have the student stage, when you're learning, you're in school, you're apprenticing, you're interning, and that's just all about learning. The second stage is the householder stage. That's when we're becoming members of the community. We're family. We find, and this is where they say those first 3 desires of pleasure, success, wealth, if those are things that you desire, community service, doing your obligations, those all happen in the householder stage. Excuse me. And so we're supposed to be involved in the world. We're supposed to have desires, or not supposed to, we do, and it's acknowledging that. And so for many of you, I know for myself, like I knew how much I loved the divine presence, and I wanted to know my oneness and union with it. But as much as I had that desire, I also had a very deep desire to have a family and to express that part of us. And what Hinduism is recognizing that. It's not saying put that aside and only seek God. It's saying, no, this is part of our human life. We want success. We want to participate in the world. We want families. We want to take time. And so to engage, to allow ourselves and accept that that is part of our journey, is to be householders. What's interesting is in psychology, for a long time they focused on development of children. And if you took, or at least this was when I took psychology, it's probably changed, I only learned it up till age 25, because they basically said all the big developmental changes, the really big shifts happen between birth and 25. And then they discover, now there's this whole other field of adult development, because they find that adults still continue to develop. But interestingly, they go through a period of not developing very much, and that's from 25 to 55. Interestingly, the householder age. If you're raising children and wanting to make success, this is not a time to be going through a lot of changes. Stability is a really important quality during these times. So it's not that people don't change. It doesn't mean that we don't grow. But in general, that's a time where everything slows down. And then when the children go off to college or away from home, then the development in adults start to develop again. We get interested in our inner life more. We start to question things and start going often. There's now older people are going back to college and learning new careers, learning new skills. And then this whole big surge into this new creative and expansive development. So we continue to evolve. So it really works well with this whole Hinduism stages of life. Now in Hinduism, the third stage is the retirement stage, and that starts to happen when one becomes a grandparent in the Hindu teaching. The idea is that when we're young is when we have a lot of action, we have a lot of desire, and it's all very intense, but that would be a terrible thing to start to feel all the way until you leave the planet. That in fact, we are tailor-made to start losing those desires. They're not quite as intense, this desire for success or for fame, and we no longer have the responsibilities of taking care of a children, that's actually tailor-made to allow us to start letting go of this world. And so they really honor this stage of retirement, of beginning to let go, making the shift from being fully involved and engaged in this world to letting go. So for Hindus, this was a time to really develop your spiritual life, to even go off onto a monastic retreat, to go and meditate for long hours, reflect for long hours. You don't have as many interruptions. You don't have as many responsibilities. Now, in Western society, we tend to learn new trades or learn new ways of being, but eventually all of us, I think, that becomes less important, and our spiritual, if we're on a spiritual path, starts to grow. And then the final stage, the fourth, they always have four, is the sannyasin. And the sannyasin is when you totally give up connection or attachment to all form. So you no longer have any desires, you no longer have attachments, you no longer have resistances. It's this or that. And so it's embodied as what they call a mendicant, a homeless mendicant, someone who travels, wanders the streets, and has their begging bowl. So in India, they have, well, we're going to talk about it in a minute, the untouchables, which are sort of what we would say are homeless people. But then you have the sannyasin, which were holy men. So they're also homeless, but they're conscious and whole. They're given their entire life. They are only there for God, and they honor them. In some ways, we could say Jesus was a sannyasin. He didn't have a home. He didn't have food. He didn't have a job. He didn't have family. That he was completely separate. By this stage, you've completely walked out of normal world and society, and you're operating on a completely different world, in a different world, in essence. Jesus said, "I'm not of this world." And he was a homeless mendicant. He got food. And not just him, his disciples. So that's would be, we have one, they have many. Or when I say we, excuse me, the Christian faith. The Western teaching, we tend to think of singular people. The great thing about India is they have so many people that are considered spiritually awake. So, for instance, I had neighbors who were Hindu. One was from northern India and one was from southern India. And this was the first time I knew and understood that India has 5 different languages. So they didn't even speak the same language. They could find some common language, but really they used English as their common language. And they each had different gurus in their living room. And there was no sense of pictures, not the guru didn't live in their living room, the pictures of the gurus. And there's no sense of my guru is better than your guru and you should start to quit. It was just an acceptance that we're all called to different spiritual teachers, and they honored their spiritual teachers. Hinduism just so completely honors this diversity. The other thing to understand about these 4 stages, like all the other ones before us, is they're not necessarily exclusive. So you have someone like Ramana Maharshi. He was, at 14 years old, he left the world physically. He still was here, and he went up into a mountain and just sort of died to everything. So he was sort of in the sannyasin state during what normally would be considered the student stage. Lahiri Mahasai, so Paramahansa Yogananda was the second Hindu guru to come over to the United States in the early 1900s. His teacher was Sri Yukteswar, and Sri Yukteswar had a teacher named Lahiri Mahasai, and he was in the 1800s in India. He was a householder, so where his 2 disciples that came after him were renunciates, he himself was very involved in life. And in fact, I thought he just went to a job and then meditated all day after the job. But I recently learned, I knew he was married, but he had 5 children. He was very engaged in their education. He tutored all the kids. He became part of the community program and tutored all the kids who needed help at school. So here's this guy working full-time, comes home, helps with his 5 children, works in the community, doing his civic duty, helping tutor the children, and he's this spiritual guru teaching all these people how to become enlightened. It's fairly unique. Not a lot of people can do it. But it is possible. So these different stages, it's to acknowledge them, but as we always are looking at all of these, we're not to hold to them rigidly, just to give us some information about, again, our own path. The other thing we're talking about all year is our own individual unique path, and we are chief executive officers of our own path. We are the authority of our own path, and so we need to be responsible, and so all of these are ways to start to understand and look at all the nuances of where we are on our journey. The second aspect is stations of life. Now, this is the very controversial caste system. What's interesting about the Hindu caste system is it's religiously based. I mean, we definitely have hierarchy in religion. I wasn't in some religions more than others in the Western version, but I think of our hierarchy and our authority coming primarily from our political system, or the feudal system, or in the old European. This is in there very strongly in their religion, and again, there's 4 castes. There's actually a 5th caste, which they didn't even include for a long time, which are the untouchables. Gandhi is the one who really came along and changed that and said, no, these are people we care about and value and care for, but until then they were considered untouchable. They're like our homeless. You just ignore them. We don't even give them a caste system. So the 4 caste systems are the Brahmin, and that's the only word I can say, so I won't say the Hindu words for the other ones because I can't say it. I can read them, but I can't say it out loud. The Brahmin are the prophets, are the seers, are the artists, are the musicians, are the people, the religious leaders. They're the teachers. They're the people who are a little bit outside the system, and because there's a little bit of a detachment, they can see, they comment, they reflect back to the world and to the culture what they're seeing. The next group is they're leaders. They're the CEOs of companies. They're the political leaders. They're the people who run things, and they have an incredible ability to galvanize people, to organize people, to cultivate movements if they need to, but to really get people support and lead. That's a gift that they have, so that's the next caste system. The other caste system is the producers. These are the people who are good at just creating things. In the old days, that would be like the blacksmiths. Today, I think it's our tech people are doing software, creating techniques. I also think electricians, anyone who can just make things happen. They create things with their hands, now it's with our mind, with all our technology. Those are called the producers, and I can't say their Sanskrit name. And then I can say the last one is Shudras, and those are the unskilled workers. Those are the people who are here to be of service in what we would call unskilled labor. So those are the 4 different categories. Again, they can cross over. So I was just reading a quote this morning by Martin Luther King where he was talking about, that's Black History Month. We have little videos, but we're going to learn how to use them for showing Black history within Science of Mind. So Martin Luther King talked about how it's important for spiritual communities, he said churches, spiritual communities, to maintain their connection with the prophet, that's part of our lineage, is to be able to look at society and say, these things are not working, these things need to be better. That if churches, he said, lose that ability to be detached from the system and be able to call forth the highest and best, then our world misses that calling forth of the highest ideals. So in that way, he's very much being like a Brahmin. He's calling out the vision. At the same time, he was a leader. The guy, we can say, knows how to galvanize people, get everyone going and focused. So it's how those two can work together. You can have someone who has vision and a leader. And good leaders will listen to people of vision. In fact, what got Martin Luther King towards, someone told him as he was beginning the civil rights movement, he hadn't embraced nonviolence yet, and someone said, you really need to learn from Gandhi. A Brahmin, a seer, was telling him, and he listened, and he followed, and he started learning from Gandhi and brought in the nonviolent principles. So leaders will listen to Brahmins, and Brahmins, the reason why in Hinduism they felt the seers shouldn't get involved in leadership roles is because then they get corrupt. That as soon as you start getting in the system and you benefit from the system, you no longer are detached, and you can't see clearly. Which is how we say spiritually. So I think actually on the spiritual journey, we all become Brahmins to a certain extent, because the entire part of the spiritual journey is to deepen our awareness that is greater than the world around us. And every time we do that, and every time we connect with pure spirit, we're detaching a little bit from the world as it's happening. So I think if you're on a spiritual journey, Martin Luther King was talking about spiritual communities, but even all of us as individuals have that quality of being seers, of being able to see. And sometimes you may recognize this in your own world, that you can see things that your friends don't necessarily see. You have a clarity of vision because we're waking up. The challenge of the caste system is that it became very rigid and unconscious and structured. They can't marry. They couldn't intermarry, so Brahmins couldn't marry the next day, and that was considered illegal. Then it was all inheritance, so if you were a Brahmin and you had children, all your children were automatically Brahmin, and we know that's not true. I mean, it'd be like if you're a CEO, all your kids are therefore meant to be CEOs. No, kids are diverse. So you could see how quickly this system became hurtful and rigid, and is not a system that we want to emulate. But Houston Smith's goal always in the book of the world's religions is to look at the ideal. Do we have something to learn from the ideals of it? It may not be practiced that way. So even as you're reading it, if you have an opportunity to read it, it's not to say, is this a good system? Is there anything I can learn about myself, about my own path? Am I someone who tends to like leading people? Am I a creator with my hands? And ideally, and this is where we're going to go into the next section of oneness, when we are spiritually awake and we recognize that there's only one power and one presence, we recognize all of these are equal. Human beings of ourselves, when we divest ourselves from our connection to our source, have a wonderful habit pattern, not wonderful, I said that sarcastically, a limiting habit pattern of wanting to be superior to other human beings, to make ourselves feel better. So we use whatever our strengths are to overpower or to feel better than other groups. So that's why separation is always happening. Theirs comes from their caste system. We have it from our racism and sexism and all the other isms. Human beings do this. When we start to recognize underneath all of this diversity is this oneness, then we start to see that the wholeness and the beauty of pure spirit is equally in the unskilled laborer as it is in the Brahmin. Gloria was sharing yesterday, I hope you don't mind, Gloria, a beautiful story of when she was in Bali. This woman, I can't share it like Gloria does, but there was a woman who would sweep the stairs by hand and just put marigolds between all the stairs. And this was just creating beauty, and she was in peace. That is as holy and as important a role to play on earth as any CEO. When we see with the eyes of God, there is no separation, there's no better or less than. We are all equal in this oneness and union in God. And so this is the beauty of really understanding. Now, Hinduism has this idea of oneness, so they have all this diversity. I have a colleague who's in South Africa, and he wrote this past week, that in South Africa, diversity is so clear. He said what they're really struggling with is trying to find that connection, the oneness. So even as we're looking at all the diversity within Hinduism, the diversity with all these religions, and to see and play in all the diversity that's in this room, to remember that the diversity is hard to fully enjoy unless we know the oneness first and foremost. And the real joy of the diversity comes when we are anchored into that oneness and union of pure spirit. So again, if you're new, the most primary fundamental principle that we teach is that there is only one power and one presence. It's formless. It is in, through, and as all creation. Anything that has form, anything that you can see, taste, or touch, is an expression of this oneness, and that this oneness transcends all of it. It's all of our thoughts, and it is greater than all of our thoughts. There's only one, which means there's nothing that opposes it. In the 80s, I was in college. I took an East Asian religions class. I was learning positive affirmations, new thought stuff. I was just learning, as we do, all sorts of things. And then in the early 90s, I was just brought to my knees. I was in this emotional turmoil, and I had all this knowledge. I knew principles. I used affirmations. I had done therapy. I had done all this stuff, and I was brought to my knees. And it was in that moment that I asked Spirit, I said, I know there's degrees to everything, there's levels to everything. It's just so complicated. Can you just please help me with something that's just simple and that will heal me? And that's when this book, Thunder of Silence, came to me. Someone literally gave the book Thunder of Silence to me. It's by Joel Goldsmith. And for those of you who've read it, and let me just say first the downside of it. Joel does have a very absolutist way of writing. And I'm not an absolutist person, and I would prefer him not to be an absolutist in his way of writing. And what he's pointing to has such depth and so rich that I would hate us to throw away such a rich and deep book because of his writing style. And what he points to over and over and over and over and over in his book is that there's only one power, and that all our problems come from this subtle belief that there's another power. That we walk through life always thinking there's something out there that's opposing this one power. Now, as we're with this, I don't want to go into sort of a denial of our experience. So on the human level, we do experience multiple powers. There's a great fire in Santa Rosa. That feels very powerful. It's impacting people's lives. People get sick. I do not feel the same when I'm sick and have the flu than when I'm healthy and strong. So that flu feels like it's having a power over me. We impact one another. I feel being in a new space, it impacts me. Our environments impact me. You can go to work. You have employers. They impact on what choices you might make at your job because of your employers. You impact other people. If you're an employee, you have employees or clients. So there's a lot of what we call secondary causation. A lot of power, things influencing other things. If you've read a little bit of Joel Goldsmith, he talks about usually the way we see of powers is power over something else. It's power impacting one another, power dominating sometimes. But sometimes it's fun, like we have the Super Bowl today. Those are two powers, and people are doing it because they want to. There's no meaning in it, but people will get really excited. I'm sorry, there is meaning in it. But what am I saying? Okay, so we have people who really identify with the Eagles, people who really identify with the Patriots, and then there's a whole bunch of people, I think most of them are here, who don't care, who are not engaged. But the important part is that, but that's a fun way of playing with power, right? We get attached and we get involved, and we want to see one dominate the other, but we know no one's going to get hurt or it has no long. And regardless of where you land on that, we're still all one. The person who has no interest in the huge Philadelphia Eagle fan and the huge Patriot fan, we're all one. And that is the power of being on this journey, is to really get that beyond just a concept, but to sink deeply into that stillness and the silence, because all of these things are happening on the surface of life. And the way to really start to feel into the oneness, so it's not just a concept, is go into that wonderful stillness and silence within. And we heard in our reading this morning the power of silence. And as serendipity would have it, I read yesterday this wonderful article on silence, that these researchers are discovering how important just having silence is on our life. And the way they found it out is they were doing research on these mice, and the intent of the research was they wanted to see the different impacts of noise on the mice. So the research was focused on the different types of noise and the mice who were exposed to the noise. And then they had a control group who had no noise. They were just silent. That was just the control group. That wasn't who they were researching. And yet they were amazed to find out that the mice who had total silence for 2 hours during these research studies, they would have periods of 2 hours of silence, new neurons were being created in their brain. And now they were saying neurons are created all the time by the brain and they're just not used. These neurons were immediately integrated. They were in the learning section and the memory section of the brain, and as soon as they were being created, they were being integrated and being used within the brain. And they were discovering this on mice. The power of silence It renews and regenerates. We can't see with new eyes. We can't see that oneness if our mind is going all the time. Because our mind, if you just stop for even a minute, your mind's immediately comparing, it's analyzing, it's judging, it's thinking, but it's always relative. Our mind it's not bad, but it's full of relative thoughts. It's only as we let go and move into that deeper and deeper stillness that relatively starts to slow down, and we got to see the oneness. I think of Genesis, Joseph sold into slavery. Good things happen to him, bad things happen. It's a Buddhist story, the same thing. He goes into the prison, and then he becomes the Pharaoh's right-hand guy. He helps save his brothers. His brothers are apologizing for selling him into slavery. I think that's important to apologize for that. And Joseph says, the book of Genesis in the Bible ends with what people mean for evil, what we do out of separation, what we do out of our limited thoughts, God, the infinite eternal oneness, means for good. To the human mind, that makes no sense because our human mind's always in that relative mode. But when we go deep into that stillness, we start to see with new eyes. We start to see with the wholeness and the perfection of pure spirit. And we recognize that within everything, within every single moment, is the power of this oneness. And then we stop judging our life from this separation. And we can do it first with our minds. I absolutely agree with Joel Goldsmith that going into that stillness, we can get to know the peace that passes human understanding. But even to get there, thinking and consuming our thoughts with the idea of oneness is one of the most powerful gifts that we can give to ourselves that will impact how we experience our day even today. Not just this week, not just this month, not just this year, but today. If we just continually hold to ourselves that I'm speaking only to the divine presence. In Hinduism, Brahma is the name they don't use the word God, they use the word Brahma. I see only the divine out here. There's only God that I'm speaking to. I'm not speaking to relativity. I'm only speaking to the wholeness and the perfection of pure spirit. The one power, there's only one thing happening. That which is speaking and that which is hearing is the same thing. I shared the story once before, and I shared it because it's so relevant to this topic of power, because it was when I was trying to understand God's power connected to the human power. Because I was so on board, I was seeing and knowing the divine presence, oneness everywhere, just oneness. Even if you just take the word God out and just say oneness, oneness, oneness. There's only one. There's only one. I only see one. One thing's happening. So I was really working on that. But then I started working, as I've mentioned, at the psychiatric hospital. And the thing I noticed at the psychiatric hospital was how hierarchical it was. And I was very conscious of it because I was on the bottom rung. In the mental health field, I was a mental health worker. Everybody else was above me. And I started talking about, well, it's nice. It started to feel namby-pamby, Pollyannish. Oh, there's only one power, one presence. But when I go to the hospital, I ain't got no power. And so I was really trying to figure that out. Like, how does this even matter in the real world to say there's only one power when I go into a system where that's so hierarchical and I'm at the bottom rung? So, as we can do, we ask questions. We stay in the question. I started asking, what does that look like? What does it mean to have God's power in the midst of this situation? And I went to work, and the whole day, it was like revelation after revelation. So I always did my spiritual practices. I often didn't get them all done before I went to work, so I'd have to use my break time. So I was off in the closet somewhere meditating, and one of my coworkers, other mental health worker, she came in and she was just commenting on, wow, you just are so committed to this practice, and you really inspire me. I really want to do more of that myself. Oh, I wasn't doing it for show. I was trying to hide, but I was grateful. Then later on, the charge nurse of the unit that I was working on, she goes, Harriet, you're so different. When we take people down or there's challenges, you never seem to get upset or flustered. You stay peaceful or calm. What are you doing? And I hadn't thought about it one way or the other. I was just saying, well, I'm just seeing oneness. I just see their God, I'm just holding it all in God. And I wasn't seeing myself from their perspective. I was always focusing on the divine. And then a doctor came up and said, Harriet, you're so different than everybody else here. You operate and you talk to everybody so differently. What do you do differently? And so through that entire day, as I was just in the inquiry of what God's power looked like, Spirit was responding to me, going back to other talks that Spirit's always engaged with us. If we ask it, we'll answer. If we're listening, revealing to me that I may not have had the power in terms of the human realm in the hospital, but I had a different type of power by being in the oneness and union in God. I knew when I went there, using Brahma's, I'll use Brahma since we're in Hinduism, I knew that the administrators didn't hire me. I knew my paychecks didn't come from the hospital. I knew Brahma hired me. I knew Brahma was the source of my paychecks. I knew Brahma was the source of the lessons that I needed to learn. It wasn't like it was all roses. I had things to learn all the time while I was there. That was part of Brahma. That was part of this oneness and union in God. Everything I held that was happening was not a separation of this is good and this is bad. This is in the divine flow. This is not in the divine flow. It was all the divine flow. And when we start interpreting our life from that perspective, from the one power and one presence is in, through, and as everything in this room, there's only one thing happening, and we continue to bring our mind's attention to that over and over and over again, we will find ourselves experiencing life from a completely different, expansive place. We find that we're less afraid. That was one of the things I didn't even know how much fear I had been carrying around because it was just part of me my whole life. I didn't even know it was there. But as I really started working with this oneness, this fear that something bad could happen to me, that this world could do something to me, I'm like, no, my life is in divine. I'm always in that divine presence. I trust it completely with everything that I am and with everything that I have. And even if negative things happen, that's part of the divine, and it changes everything. The walls of protection start to dissolve. I feel safe wherever I go. And guess what? The world responds. Things start to shift and work in alignment with that. Because I don't see things as out of alignment anymore. So much of how we live our life is how we're interpreting it in our head, how we're seeing it. I love the example of the Fillmores who were living in the Old West. They were Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who are the founders of Unity, were living at the same time as Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp. All those Westerns that we're seeing are the same time that the Fillmores are living in the same places, and they're vegetarians and healing themselves of tuberculosis, and they're just like living in a different universe. Exact same time and place, different universe. That's the power of our consciousness. That's the power of this oneness. It's available to us right now. So let's just close our eyes now. And notice. I want to ask, if you can, to not even analyze what we've been hearing, because there's times for that, but just to let go of even analyzing it or judging, this is good, this is bad, I like this, I don't like that. You can return to it later if you want to, but just for the moment, just think about oneness. See if you can allow your mind to think about oneness, just the concept of oneness. But there's nothing opposing this oneness. There's no subtle energy in the invisible trying to keep you from knowing silence in this moment. That even your thoughts are for you. Everything is for you. There's nothing opposing you. Oneness. Let's just take a moment and be in oneness, first with our thoughts, and if you get to move a little bit, have a second beyond your thoughts, that's great. It's okay if you don't. You're judging yourself, you're not in oneness. Just recognize the oneness is in the judgment and let it go. And from this just moment of oneness, you might have a lot of challenges in your life. I'm just going to invite you to pick one. It could be a big challenge. Doesn't matter, big challenge or a small challenge. Just think of one challenge. And I want you to see that challenge in your mind's eye and just see if you can think about the idea of oneness behind that challenge. Like you have the challenge, and then right behind that challenge is this oneness. And if you can, See if you can feel the oneness in the midst of the challenge. So there's no separation. The oneness is in the midst of the challenge. You don't have to do anything. You're not trying to fix the challenge. You're not trying to make it go away. You're just recognizing that there's no separation. There's no separation. There's oneness and nothing else. So the oneness, the challenge and the oneness are one. See if you can be with that. You may feel your heart opening a little, embracing. There's no more defense. So if you have had any insights, just take note of it. If you didn't have any insights, practice this later today when you have a longer period of stillness. Allow yourself to be in silence today and throughout this week around this challenge. Again, not trying to change the challenge, not trying to fix it, but seeing it as part of the oneness. And see if you feel any movements, not just internally, but if you start seeing the movements externally. It is always available to us in every moment. That oneness is now. And so let's go into prayer from this place. What we recognize is when we are in that oneness, all our needs are met. Healing is happening. Not through will, not through force, not through effort, but simply through that deep, deep, deep abiding recognition. Below all of our thoughts is the source of all of our good, is the source of infinite good that has no limit, that has no end, and that we are swimming in this goodness all of the time. That our entire life, right in this moment, is swimming in goodness, in love, in peace, in abundance, in harmony, not because we've made it, but because we've stopped and allowed ourselves to connect with the source of all life. And the source of all life is goodness. It is good. It is love. It is harmony. It is peace. It is joy. These are concepts and these are words, but we are, each and every one of us, inheritors of the kingdom and queendom of heaven on earth. We are here to be full expressions of this one life and this one power and this one presence. We are here to heal the division of separation, of judgment, and to be in this consciousness of oneness and to experience this heaven consciousness even in every area of our life. In every area of our life. There's no part of our life that gets rejected. There's no part of our life that is ever, ever outside of this oneness. Whether it's our physical health. This is a beautiful expression of our oneness. Whether it's good days or bad days in the physical health, behind all of it, in the midst of all of it, is this oneness. In the midst of our financial challenges, in the midst of relationship challenges, in the midst of challenges that you may have at work, employers, employees, clients, what deadlines, in the midst of everyday life, in the midst of our householder duties, in the midst of wherever we are on our journey, whatever our paths look like, is this one power and this one presence. We keep it simple and it changes our life. One power, one presence. We see it, we feel it, we hear it, we sense it, we smell it, we taste it. One power, one power, one power into the depths of the stillness. And as that new life regenerates us, it gives us everything that we need in form. It is constantly revealing every moment of every day exactly what we need whatever lessons we need, whatever gifts, whatever new understandings that we need. We trust this oneness with our entire heart, body, mind, and soul. We let go and we let go and we let go, and we just celebrate that we are in the state of heaven all of the time, right here, right now. To God be the glory, to the infinite Brahma of the universe, to be the Sat, the beingness, the ground of all being, be the glory. It is here, it is now, and we are it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Deep abiding peace and everlasting joy, we release this word together now. As one, we say, and so it is. Amen. And amen.